proceed.
Thank you. Appearance for the record.
Karen McDonald with People.
Thank you, Mark Keast on behalf of the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. David Williams on behalf of the people.
Paulette Michelle Lofton on behalf of Ethan Crumbley.
On behalf of Ethan Crumbley.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Deborah H. McKelvey on behalf of Ethan Crumbley.
Thank you. You all may be seated, but before you have a seat, counsel, please approach.
We didn't either, but I'm just saying, I know.
We still anticipate a longer rebuttal witness.
Yeah.
So,
But again, I can be quick on reference.
Yeah, so I'm just letting you all know that at 4:30 ended today. Then after this, pretty much be on vacation after tomorrow. So just want to put you all on notice so you know, try to eliminate some questions and then come to the point real quick.
Gonna do it.
Thank you. Dr. King, sir, you may retake the stand. Sir, you may be seated. You are still under oath, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're very welcome. People, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, I want to try to get as quickly as I can through the testing portion of your report, but what I need to do is to listen to my question, pretty much yes or no, try to answer just the question I'm asking. If there's something else you can address it on, redirect. All right?
Okay. Thank you,
All
sir.
right. So, Doctor, you tested the defendant and you described symptomology, things he's experiencing at the time of the testing, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, and we talked about PTSD, and we talked about the fact you agree with me that's a result of the shooting, not the cause of the shooting, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so, Doctor, you make a number of statements in your testing, and I'll just review a few of those. One of the things on page 35, you say that the defendant feels trapped and constantly persecuted with no means of escape. And that's one of the things that comes out of one of your tests, right? But that's at the time you tested him. Would you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so you're not saying he felt that leading up to the shooting. You're saying he feels that now. And that's not surprising given that he's in jail facing a long prison sentence. Would you agree?
I don't.
You don't agree with that? Okay. You don't expect that someone in jail for a long sentence would feel, quote, trapped and constantly persecuted with no means of escape.
That's how we felt before also.
Doctor, in your summary, you state that the defendant was, quote, on page 40, not believed by any responsible adults. Who are the responsible adults you're talking about?
His parents,
Okay, who else?
his high school, his counselor.
All right, that's important to me, Doctor. Explain to me when his high school counselor, quote, did not believe him. Because, in fact, the defendant lied to the counselor and said he was not suffering this distress, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so it's not that the counselor didn't believe him, it's the defendant didn't tell him.
He told him in his drawings on his assignments.
Okay, but Doctor, it's not that he didn't believe him, it's that when he asked him about the drawings, the defendant lied.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
All right, okay. What other adults, what other responsible adults didn't believe the defendant? I'm not talking about people he lied to who didn't pick up on it. I'm talking about people that he expressed his need for help to and who did not believe him, other than his parents.
So those were the notable ones, his parents and his high school counselor.
You just agree with me, doctor. He didn't tell the high school counselor he wanted help. He said the opposite.
Okay.
Is that a yes, doctor?
Yes, sir.
Doctor, you described the defendant as a broken person with a broken brain, and I don't need you to describe that. I need to know what does that mean? What's the medical definition of a broken person with a broken brain?
Mental illness is a symptom of a broken brain.
Is broken brain a medical term, doctor?
It is a layman's term. I'll be more than happy to go into clinical definitions of a broken brain.
Is there a clinical definition? Like if I look it up, am I going to find that?
What you're going to see is brain dis-ease, brain dysfunction, cingulate gyrus dysfunction, limbic system dysfunction. All of those are clinical terms, and I thought we wanted to be brief, so that's why I said a broken brain.
All right, and you'd agree with me that a broken brain is not a Miller factor, right?
It's not a Miller factor.
And you agree that you're not offering a fix for the broken brain, are you?
I'm sorry, sir?
You're not offering a fix for a broken brain,
No, sir.
okay? And you're not telling the court even that it can be fixed, are you?
Yes, I am actually.
Okay? You know that this can be fixed.
Yes, sir.
All right. Doctor, you finished that sentence on page 40 describing the defendant as a person waiting for something terrible. That's in the third to last sentence in the last full paragraph on page 40.
The third to last sentence.
In the last full paragraph. So it's the paragraph under summary of defendant's mental illness.
Okay.
And you say broken person with a broken brain waiting for something terrible to happen. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Doctor, he wasn't waiting, was he?
He was.
He was planning. Wasn't he planning something terrible?
He was.
Right. And he planned it out and he wrote about it and he recorded himself talking about it and he actually anticipated people finding his recordings, right?
Yes, sir.
And then he carried out something terrible, right?
Yes, sir.
You make another remarkable statement on the last line in the last full paragraph of page 40. Quote, the defendant's form of mental illness, if not treated, typically ends with deadly consequences. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
You don't cite anything to support that in your report, do you?
It's not cited in my report, sir. That is correct.
Okay, what do you base that on? The idea that the defendant's form of mental illness, as you describe it, typically ends with deadly consequences.
Yes, sir.
Can you cite the court what you rely on for that prospect?
Every day in this country, I'm citing it. I'm giving you the evidence, sir. 22 veterans killed themselves.
Doctor, that's not the question. You use the word typically, and you use the mental illness describing this defendant. And what I'm asking you is, where do you get that it typically ends in deadly consequences?
Untreated mental illness, sir, without intervention, does not end very well.
But you say it typically ends with deadly consequences.
Yes, sir.
You got anything you can cite that says that?
22 veterans every day in this country.
The disorders that you list that you diagnose the defendant with, those aren't specifically associated with youth, are they?
Can you rephrase that question, please, sir?
The disorders that you diagnose the defendant with on page 41, those are not specifically associated with youth, are they?
That's not true.
Okay, tell me.
Depression?
You're saying is associated with youth. Adults don't have depression?
Yes, sir. And so do adolescents.
I understand, doctor. What I'm saying is specifically associated with youth. That this is a problem that youth face that adults do not. And you would agree with me that adults suffer from major depressive disorder or even severe with psychotic features, as you describe it, generalized anxiety disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder, right?
Yes, sir.
Those are not exclusive to youth.
Oh, correct.
Lots of adults have those same diagnoses.
Absolutely.
And lots of those people with those disorders don't kill anyone, do they?
That is correct.
Lots of people suffer depression. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Even severe depression.
Yes, sir.
And those people don't all become mass shooters, do they?
That is true.
Doctor, you spend quite a bit of time talking about implicit bias. And I want to start our discussion about that and say, you and I agree that implicit bias exists. and it's been widely studied and well documented, and I know you teach seminars on it, and I agree with you that it's an important issue. What I don't understand is how implicit bias has anything to do with this case, so that's what I want to focus on, okay? What was the genesis of this idea of yours to view this shooter and this shooting through the lens of race?
So what I do when I teach implicit bias classes, sir,
So, doctor, I want to stop you. My specific question is, what was the genesis of this idea that you have to view this shooter and this shooting through the lens of race?
I was about to explain it to you, sir.
Let me ask you this. Was that your idea or someone else's?
It's actually based on my profession, on my professional experience, sir.
All right, so this was your idea?
It's not solely my idea, sir.
No, what I mean is, when you decided to put that in your report, no one said to you, hey, doctor, how about implicit bias? You came to them and said, you know what, I can explain this, it's implicit bias. True? It's your idea.
No, sir.
Who involved in this case said to you, how about implicit bias?
I got my information by looking at the data and by disaggregating the data, sir.
I'm not talking about the data that you rely on. I'm talking about the idea. Have you ever seen another mitigation report that blames a defendant's conduct on implicit bias?
I have not.
Okay. And what I'm saying is, so you have this idea, right?
Okay.
And where did that come from?
From my professional training and my research and teaching on implicit bias.
So, doctor, on page 44, you refer to implicit bias as, quote, perhaps the most telling variable that contributed to the tragic events that can be traced, pardon me, the most telling variable that contributed to the tragic events can be traced to implicit bias. You see that?
I don't see it, but I do agree.
It's the first sentence on page 44 under implicit bias and failure to act.
Just one moment, sir. Okay.
What do you mean by the most telling variable? You know what, let's make this faster. What are the other variables that are not as telling?
Explicit bias did not seem to be a factor. That is one variable that did not seem to be a factor.
Hold on, doctor. I'm talking about variables in this case. You're talking about the most telling variable in this case. You say that contributed to the tragic events. You're talking about the shooting in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
I want to know the variables you're talking about in this case for which implicit bias is the most telling. What are the other variables related to this case?
I don't have fathers.
It's the only variable?
That's what I looked at, sir.
All right. So you don't look at parental neglect or his home life as one of the most telling variables?
They're all contributing factors.
Or the untreated mental illness, or you claim untreated mental illness that according to you typically ends with the defendant killing someone? That's not the most telling variable to you?
They're all contributing factors.
All right. You say multiple times in your report that the defendant needed and was asking for help and he didn't get it, right? That's according to you.
Yes, sir.
And the people you say that he didn't get it from are his parents, and then you told me the school, right?
Yes, sir.
Does implicit bias have anything to do with his parents' failure to get him help?
I'm sorry?
Does implicit bias have anything to do with his parents' failure to get him help?
I don't think so.
Okay, so you're just talking about the school.
Yes, sir.
All right. And doctor, when you're talking about the school, one of the things you rely on are the homework papers where the defendant drew guns and notes all over them, right? Correct?
That's one reason. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And you pasted those assignments into your report, right?
Yes, sir.
And you referenced those in several places in your report, and I want to go over 3 of those with you very briefly. On page 2 of your report, you say the defendant had been turning in assignments Doctor, let's skip to page 3. Under your sources of information, you list assignments turned into the Oxford High School leading up to the offense. Do you see that? It's the 4th bullet point up.
Yes, I do.
All right, you say on page 2, leading up to the offense, the defendant had been turning in school, this is the bottom paragraph on that page, about a little more than halfway through, it says, the defendant had been turning in school assignments with weapons drawn on them and sad faces and saying things like, the world is a joke, school is a joke, I'm a joke for falling for a fool's joke. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you attach that specific assignment, and it's at page 63 of your report. You want to take my word for it, or you can look. But
I take your word for it, sir.
All right, page 63 says, the world is a joke, school is a joke, I'm a joke. That's what you're referring to, right?
As one of the assignments, yes, sir.
Yeah, and then on page 48, you say, despite turning in assignments with weapons drawn on every assignment, he was not suspended nor expelled from school because implicit bias says he did not fit the profile of a troubled student. You see that on page 48?
Yes, sir.
And then you attach all those assignments that you're relying on, right?
Yes, sir.
And your point is no one paid attention to those drawings because the defendant is white, right?
My
That's
point
implicit
is,
bias,
he
right?
is not subject to the same level of rigor.
And you're relying on the homework assignments because you say if someone else had turned those in, they would have paid attention, but because the defendant is white, they overlooked that. That's your
Yes,
opinion.
based on
Okay.
the data. Yes, sir.
Doctor, when and where were those homework papers found? Do you know?
I believe they were found in his backpack.
Okay.
And, the
Okay,
police-
that's what I needed to know. After the shooting, right?
That is correct.
All right. And you notice there are no grades or anyone else's handwriting on any of those, are there?
That is correct.
And doctor, those assignments, do you have any evidence that anyone other than the defendant saw those until after the shooting?
I do not.
Okay. And so when you repeatedly say in your report that those assignments were turned in, you assumed that, right?
That is correct.
And you accused the teachers at Oxford High School of being racist. It's implicit bias, not overt, but it's racism, right?
No, sir.
You're saying that implicit bias is not a form of racism.
Implicit bias is not racism, sir.
Okay.
They're two very different terms.
Okay, and so what you're saying is because the student was white and not black, not racism, but implicit bias, they didn't pay attention to those assignments, right? That's what you put in your report.
Everyone in this courtroom has some form of implicit bias, sir. It has nothing to do with race.
I'm not debating that with you, doctor. What I'm saying is you're accusing those teachers of not paying attention to those homework papers because the defendant was white. That's your testimony.
That is correct.
Right. And doctor, none of those folks saw those homework papers. So you accused teachers at Oxford High School of not paying attention to the defendant because of his race when they never saw those things. Does that matter to you?
Sir, he turned in...
Does it matter to you, doctor?
It does matter.
Okay. Do you want to amend your statement now
I do
about
not.
Oxford High School based on the homework papers?
I do
Now that
not.
you know they didn't see them, you're going to stick with that.
Yes, sir.
Doctor, to be clear, you're stating that implicit bias is relevant to this case, right, which is about a white student at a mostly white school who killed 4 other white students, shot a white teacher, shot 6 other white students. You're saying that implicit bias plays a role in this case, right?
I do not understand your question, sir.
You understand the things I just said. Who was involved in this case? A white student, 4 white students who were killed, a white teacher, 6 other white students who were shot. You agree that those are the actors in this case who were involved in the charges here?
Those were the actors.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And you're saying implicit bias has a role in this case?
In regards to the teacher's response.
Okay. And what Miller factor does implicit bias relate to?
There is no Miller factor, sir.
Okay. And you would agree with me the Miller factors are things that mitigate a defendant's responsibility, right? Things like if you had fewer chances in life or a tough upbringing, those are mitigating, right?
That is correct.
Is growing up white in a mostly white school district a disability the defendant had to overcome?
Can you rephrase the question, sir?
Is growing up white in a mostly white school district a disability this defendant had to overcome?
I don't think so.
Okay. Did race make his circumstances more difficult?
I don't think so.
Was he discriminated against?
There's no evidence to show that.
So, doctor, would you agree with me that growing up white is not a mitigating factor in this case?
That is true.
Doctor, you testified that you reviewed the bird video and the manifesto video and the school surveillance video before you submitted your first report, correct?
I think so.
All right. And doctor, I'll tell you, and you can tell me if you disagree, but you don't mention those. Other than putting them in your sources in your first report, you don't mention them at all, again, in the rest of your first report. Would you agree with that?
That sounds about correct.
All right. In your June report on page 49, you spend about 2 pages describing what happened leading up to and on the day of the shooting, correct? Do you want to look at page 49?
I take your word for it, sir.
All right. Your report's a total of 69 pages long, right?
That is correct.
And you spend 5 sentences on the journal. Do you disagree with that?
I take your word for it, sir.
2 sentences on the bird video.
I take your word for it.
4 sentences on what you refer to as the manifesto video, right?
I take your word for it.
And then you spend about a page that you label, quote, the day of the shooting. You want to look at that, or will you agree with me?
I take your word for
All
it,
right.
sir.
But doctor, you really don't even spend a page describing the defendant's actions on the day of the shooting, do you? You never mention the defendant getting up early to get the gun and ammunition, do you?
It's not mentioned in my report.
You don't mention him packing it into his backpack?
It's not mentioned in my report.
Or getting himself to school?
It's not mentioned in my report.
Or getting into the school with the gun and the clips and the ammunition?
It's not mentioned in my report.
Or going into the bathroom?
It's not mentioned in my report.
Or putting toilet paper in his ears?
It's not mentioned in my report.
Did you ask him about that, doctor? Why he put toilet paper in his ears?
I did not.
And you don't mention the defendant shooting Phoebe, right?
I did not.
Or shooting Hannah, right?
I did not.
Or shooting, Hannah or Madison. You don't mention that.
I did not.
Or Tate.
I did not.
Or
mention
Justin, right?
any. I did not.
Or Aiden, or Molly Darnell, or John, or Riley, or Elijah, or Kylie. You don't mention any of that, do you?
I didn't think it was appropriate, sir.
Okay. That information was included, so you knew about it, you just didn't include it, right?
I did not mention any names in my report, sir.
Doctor, it's not just that you didn't mention any names. You don't talk about the defendant killing anyone, do you?
I do. It's on page 1, the first paragraph.
You know, Doctor, it's interesting you bring that up because you didn't say that. You changed your report to say allegedly the defendant did it. There is nothing in your report that suggests this defendant is responsible for the deaths of those kids. We'll get there. But you agree that was included in the materials you reviewed. You knew that information.
I do.
Doctor, you never talk about how many victims there were, do you?
I did not.
Isn't that relevant?
It is relevant.
Okay, but you don't talk about how many people he shot, how many people he killed, and how many he terrorized. You don't talk about that.
That is correct.
Doctor, you don't indicate how long the defendant spent walking through the school shooting people, do you?
I did not.
Do you know how long that was?
I do not, sir.
Do you think that matters?
Perhaps it does.
And you don't indicate the defendant's demeanor during the shooting, do you?
I did not.
And you saw the video, right?
I did.
Does not include audio, though, does it?
I'm sorry?
That video does not include audio, does it?
Which video, sir?
Of the shooting.
I do not understand. The question does not include audio?
Correct. When you see the video of the shooting, there's no audio to that, right?
I don't think so.
Okay. Did you ask anyone what it sounded like inside the school during the shooting?
I did not.
Did you listen to the body cam audio and video of a staff member trying to save Hannah?
I did not listen to any audio, sir.
Okay. Does any of that matter to you?
It does matter.
Okay. In your report, you don't even include one sentence about how this defendant killed the victims to you.
It's not included in my report, sir.
All right. How far away was the defendant when he shot each of the victims who died?
Sir, I watched the videos, and he was pretty close to them.
Pretty close. What do you mean by that? Point blank range?
Yeah, I don't know the exact measurement, so I can't testify to
It's
that.
essentially the gun to the head in most cases. You agree with that?
Those are the facts of the case.
Do you know where on the body he shot the various victims?
I do not.
In the head, the neck, the chest? You're not aware?
I believe one victim was shot in the head. At least one.
Doctor, are you aware of when and how the defendant shot Justin Schilling?
I am not aware, sir.
Okay. He's in a bathroom. He's in a bathroom. Do you know how long he was in the bathroom with Justin and Keegan before he shot Justin?
No, sir.
Do you know how he asked Justin to get down on the ground and then he executed him? Are you aware of that?
I take your word for it, sir.
Okay. Does that matter to you?
It does matter.
Doesn't it speak to the defendant and his state of mind at the time?
It does.
You think that's the product of a juvenile brain?
I do.
Okay. Did you ask the defendant about that?
I certainly asked him about the shootings.
Did you ask him about his motivation or what he was thinking when he did it?
I did, sir.
But you don't include that in your report, do you?
I did not.
Doctor, would you agree that being calm and methodical when you kill people is not a reflection of youth and impulsivity, is it?
Can you rephrase your question, sir?
No, but I can repeat it.
Okay.
Being calm and methodical when you kill people is not a reflection of youth and impulsivity, is it?
I think it's a reflection of what happened.
Okay, but it's not youth. Adults do that, right?
Absolutely.
All right, doctor, I want to move to page 67 of your report. When the defendant was sitting in the office with the backpack next to him, you say, the defendant started to feel a sense of relief, knowing that the sheriffs would descend on the school. You wrote that, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, sir.
And you characterized the defendant, we've talked about this, as someone who kept asking for help but never got it, right?
That is correct.
You cite times when he said to his friend B, I keep telling my parents I need help and they won't help me, right?
That is correct.
Doctor, that exact moment you're citing, when the defendant has the backpack next to him in the counselor's office, the defendant had the perfect opportunity to get help, didn't he?
Absolutely.
All right, and he didn't take that, right? He
That
didn't
is
take that
correct.
opportunity.
Those are the facts of the case.
Right. He'd asked for help many times, but when help is right there in front of him, he doesn't ask for help, does he?
That is correct.
And you'd agree if he just said, Mom and Dad, I need help, or I feel like there's no hope, I even brought a gun to school, they'd have given him help, wouldn't they?
I've never met his parents. I don't know how they would have reacted.
Well, the school, you don't have any reason to believe if he had said that he would not have gotten help, do you?
I don't know, sir. I don't know the answer to that question.
And it's not that no one believed him, right? He just didn't say it. You agree with me?
I do not agree with that, sir.
He never said it, did he? He never said it in the counselor's office. Did he tell you that he said, I really need help, Mr. Hopkins, I really need help, Mom and Dad? Did he tell you he said that?
He wrote on his paper,
Doctor,
I need help.
we've talked about that. He then tells them that the paper was part of a video game. He says, I'm not asking for help. That's what he says to them, right?
For the sake of brevity, sir, I will say yes.
Yeah, okay. So, at that moment, doctor, the defendant, for whatever reason, decided he wasn't going to ask for help, right? But, you agree with me, at that moment, the counselor told his parents, you have to get him help within 48 hours, right? You agree with that?
I read that.
So at most, if the defendant's just not comfortable talking about it there, he's 48 hours away at most from the help that he's allegedly been begging for, right?
So he should have gotten the help right away.
Okay, doctor, but I'm talking about the defendant now, not the other folks in the room.
I understand.
The defendant now knows, after, he's been asking for help for a long time. You cite April of 21, right?
Yes, sir.
He's less than 2 days away now, right? You agree with me?
I agree with you.
All right. And he doesn't choose to just say nothing and go home. He leaves that meeting and he goes to the bathroom and he takes the gun and he starts shooting, right?
Actually, no, sir. He went back to classes.
Okay. He went back to class and instead of finishing out his classes for the day and going home and then getting help, he decided to start shooting.
No, sir. He went to the lunchroom and had his lunch.
And then he started shooting. He had time to think about it.
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you ask the defendant about that?
I did, but he did not respond.
Okay. On page 68.
Before you move on, you said, did you ask the defendant about that? Could you just clarify about that, what that means?
Yes. So, doctor, did you confront the defendant with the fact that help was now, he was on the precipice of help, less than 2 days away? Why did he start shooting instead? Did you ask him that?
I did not ask him that question,
Okay.
sir.
So he didn't explain that to you.
That is correct.
On page 68, you describe the defendant, and I gotta look at the page. This is. Doctor, on page 68 of your report, first paragraph, conclusion events, you say the defendant now returns to class with this feeling of terror and absolute astonishment. Those are your words, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're talking about the defendant. You're saying the defendant is the one who's feeling terror.
Yes, sir.
And then, doctor, even more remarkably, the sentence before that, you say, perhaps the saddest part of this very horrible saga is that the defendant was given his backpack with the gun and told to return to class. You've heard the testimony, doctor. You've read the reports. You've heard people crying in the courtroom. You've seen the families. And you're saying that the saddest part of this is that he was sent back to class. That's what's sad about this case.
Those lives could have been saved.
That's true, doctor. And who made that decision?
A number of people.
All right. Finally, doctor, on the very last page, you include one sentence that talks about the defendant murdering anyone. It just sort of hints at it. And in fact, in that sentence, you don't blame the defendant, do you?
Where are you referring to, sir?
I'm talking about the one sentence where you ever talk about the defendant killing anyone. The only one in your entire report.
Could you just specify where this is?
Yeah, it's the last sentence under conclusion events.
Can you tell us the page?
68.
One moment, please. On page 68, the last sentence.
Of the conclusion events.
Oh,
Can you read that to the court?
it says his obsessive thoughts and compulsion propelled him to take the lives of innocent people.
Doctor, is that really your opinion about how these murders happen?
Yes, sir.
When you talk about obsessive thoughts, obsessed with what? What is the defendant obsessed with
With harming people.
that propels him to do it? He's obsessed with torturing birds and killing people, right?
That's correct.
Doctor, would you agree with me? You spend very little time discussing the journal in your report.
I spend time discussing it, sir. I don't know
Well,
very
that's-
little, but I spend
okay.
time
All right.
discussing it.
Okay, all right. So you don't discuss it at all, you've already agreed with me, in your first report, your January report, right?
That is correct.
All right. And then in your June report, you spend 6 sentences on it, right?
I take your word for it, sir.
All right. And you pull out 2 quotes, right? One about my parents would listen to me and help me, or a therapist. I used to have a dream, and I realized working hard for your whole won't do anything. That's the first quote you use in events leading up to the shooting from the journal, right?
I take your word for it, sir.
And then he includes a second quote. We're on page 49. I have this huge crush on a girl in my 6th hour. I want to ask her out, right?
That's correct.
Those are the only 2 quotes you use from the journal, right?
That's correct.
All right. And you spend almost no time talking about the birds or the bird video. Again, in your initial report, you listed it as a video and never mentioned birds anywhere again in your report. Would you agree?
He made a video of himself torturing birds,
Correct.
indicating his desire to make the birds feel
Hold on.
what he was feeling.
We're about to get there. That's 2 sentences in June, right? And in the first report, there's 0 sentences. You agree?
That is correct.
All right. And you say, as you just said, the defendant probably saw this as a way of releasing the pain he was feeling inside, right?
That is correct.
You don't explain that, right? That's it. You don't offer any further explanation of why you think he probably saw this as a way of releasing the pain he was feeling, right?
That is correct.
Did you ask the defendant about that?
I did not.
So, doctor, there are things you asked him and things you didn't. Was the defendant forthcoming with you?
Based on my testing, I believe he was.
All right. You do indicate in one of your tests he was over-reporting, right?
That is correct.
And doctor, you're aware of a discussion he had with a girl about being shot by his father with a BB gun? You're aware of that?
I saw that in one of the documentations.
Okay. And he acknowledged he lied about that, right? Sometimes he just makes stuff up.
That is true.
Did you ask him about why he killed baby birds and whether he liked it or not?
I attempted to.
Okay. And he didn't respond to that.
He's still trying to come to grips with what has happened.
Okay. And doctor, you really don't mention the manifesto video, right? You spend about 4 sentences on that, and you don't quote anything from it, do you?
Sir, I believe I've answered that question. I did mention it in my report.
Doctor, hold on. I'm asking about a different video now. We're talking about the
Okay.
manifesto video, right? And you don't address that in your first report, but in your second report on page 50, you label video the night before the night of the shooting. It says video before night of shooting, but it's video the night before the shooting, right?
Okay.
And you include a couple sentences about that. It's actually not mostly about the video. You say, the night preceding the shooting, Ethan was locked out of his home by his parents following a verbal conflict surrounding his grades, right?
There's 6 sentences in that section.
Yes, and the first one is you talk about he'd been in a verbal dispute with his parents, and his parents actually locked him out of the house, right?
That is correct.
In fact, he'd been locked out of the house when he made that video, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. You spend a couple sentences on it, but then you don't actually quote from it. You say the video shows him indicating his desire to harm students at the school, right? Those are your words, correct?
That is correct.
And you would agree with me, doctor, of the 20,000 text messages, you make no reference to 99% of those. You just include the 1%.
That were relevant, yes.
And doctor, in your report at least, you never talk about the defendant's internet searches. Agree?
That is correct.
And you were aware they existed. You testified you did pull out one about the dog, so you knew they existed. You just didn't reference them in your report.
That is correct.
In fact, you don't mention the shooting at all or the shooting video in your report, do you? You saw it, but you don't mention it, do you?
It's on page 1 of my report. The shooting.
What are you talking about, doctor?
You said I have not mentioned the shooting, and I'm saying
Yes.
on page 1 of my report, the very first paragraph.
Oh, where you say he allegedly shot and killed 4 of his
Correct.
classmates? Okay.
Correct.
You never talk about the defendant's motivation, do you? You never talk about the defendant's motivation, right?
I mentioned his mental illness, sir.
Doctor, my question is not his mental illness, it's his motivation. Why does he want to kill people? You didn't talk about that in your report, did you?
I did.
Where?
In my testing, sir, I spoke about his obsessions and his compulsions.
Doctor, I'm talking about what motivated him. Why did he want to kill other people?
I don't even think Ethan knows fully why he wanted to kill people.
Okay. I'm glad you said that, doctor, because we're going to look at some things and see if Ethan tells us,
Sure.
the shooter tells us why he was motivated to do that. All right. Doctor, I'm going to show you a series of clips from the journal, the text messages, internet searches, and so forth. I want to go through those with you. All right, okay. First one, doctor, page 22 of the journal, and the defendant says, "Then I will walk behind any girl pretty and shoot them in the back of the head. I will then shoot everyone I see, aiming for the head." You see that?
I do.
Next slide, please. "I will continue shooting people until police breach the building. I will then surrender to them and plead guilty to life in prison." You see that?
I do.
Next slide, please. "I want the world to remember me." That's in the journal, right? You saw that.
That is correct.
You don't reference that in your report, though, do you?
That is correct.
Next slide, please. "Killing myself is too much of a pussy move. People will just forget about me, and I will have never making an impact in this world. The only way is to shoot up the school." You see that?
I do.
And you were aware of that. You read that, right?
I do.
Next slide. "I'm going to kill many, many people for no sole reason. I'm going to rain fucking fire down on this school. I will cause the biggest school shooting in Michigan history. I will kill everyone I fucking see." You see that?
I do.
That tells us something about his motivation, right?
It does.
And in fact, he's right about Michigan history, isn't he? Isn't he?
I want to answer, sir. So far, yes.
Next slide, please. "I want to remember it throughout all of history." Right?
I see that.
Okay. You saw that before. I'm not showing it for the first time, right? You've seen the journal.
That is correct.
Next slide, please. "I would just hope their parents will fill with sadness and," is it distraught? "When I shoot up the school, I hope that every parent of kids I gravely murder will be so sad that they kill themselves." Do you see that?
Those are the facts of the case.
Hold on, doctor. It's not just the facts of the case. This is the defendant's own words, right? Okay. When they show the video in court, everyone can see their children and friends dying. And I want for the parents to see their kids burn to ash and bawl their eyes out. I am going to spend the rest of my life in prison. You see that?
I do.
Next slide, please. Defendant's Journal, page 18. The first victim has to be a pretty girl with a future. You see that?
I do.
And it shows a gun to the back of the head of a girl, right?
I do.
Next slide, please. "I know that rarely any shootings have happened in Michigan, so that means I will cause the biggest school shooting ever in the state. I am not going to tell myself I will surrender to the police. I wish to hear the screams of the children as I shoot them." You see that?
I do.
Next slide. So, doctor, on this slide, he's talking about what kind of weapon he has. You're aware at one point he has access to a .22 pistol, right?
I do.
And he says, "I want to do the shooting with a 9mm pistol because they are effective from killing, but all I got is a puny .22, right?" Then he draws a drawing of two different bullets. One's a .22 and one's a 9mm, and you're aware, doctor, one is a lot more deadly than the other, right?
I take your word for it, sir.
You're not aware of that?